Welcome once again to Arctic Fire. This unique gathering of swordsmiths explores the outer edge of the craft, where craftsmanship, artistry, storytelling, history, and myth combine. This year, the group has recreated objects found in the legendary hoard of Grendel, from the most ancient surviving poem in Old English, Beowulf. 4 days of live broadcast, in which legends will be reborn. Arctic Fire 2016, Grendel's Hoard.
It's my presentation, and I'm going to talk about something that I think we universally love in Arctic Fire, and that's pattern welding. I have a very ambitious demonstration, and I don't know if I'm going to get through everything in the hour, because I want to take you through some theory on pattern welding, dispel some myths about pattern welding, and actually take you through several pattern welding techniques in the forge, doing it hot. I thought it was great that Owen went right before me, so you could actually see, if you haven't watched Owen's demo that he just finished where he used plasticine to show patterns being developed. It's a wonderful introduction to what I'm going to start doing here with steel. Pattern welding is pretty ancient. We see examples of pattern welding as old as 150 BC, piled steel before that even, and you see some really complex patterns, as Owen was alluding to, in very ancient societies. So a couple of things to talk about. How do these patterns come out? I'm assuming, by the way, I know that there's a lot of bladesmiths watching this, so probably a lot of this is going to be a big yawn for you, but I want to make sure that our audience gets the benefit of understanding exactly what this weird wood grain steel is. So pattern welding, in the modern sense, starts out with a stack of different types of steels. What I use almost exclusively are thin strips, about a 16-inch thick, of something called 15N20 and 1095. Other smiths use different combinations. And the difference between these two steels, they've got about the same red hardness. And what that means is when they're red hot, they move at about the same speed under the hammer or the press. And that's important because you want the bits to stick together. So in 1095 and 15N20, so I'm just going to imagine the empty space is the 15N20 here. You've got more nickel content in the 15N20. So what we do is we literally start out with a stack of different types of steels. This is the little billet that I'm going to use for the demo. And you can see I've got 12 layers of different types of steel here. And I'm going to fuse weld this into, and when I say weld, I don't mean weld like with a MIG welder back there like I used to weld this rebar on. I mean weld in the old-fashioned sense that where we're going to heat this whole thing up to 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, a little bit hotter than that. It's going to turn yellow hot, and I'm going to compress it, and the outer layers are going to fuse. And if it went well, if I then took it to a grinder and ground the edges smooth, it would look like a solid bit of steel. If you look very close, you might be able to see some lines, but it would look like a solid chunk of steel. Then we're going to manipulate this stack in certain ways, and we're going to then put it into we're not doing this in this demo, but this is what a smith would do. You put it into an acid, and that brings out the pattern because the nickel doesn't migrate. Carbon will migrate and homogenize through a blade, but nickel stays in one layer, so you get the pattern to come out. So over here, you want me to bring this to you? This is a sword I made a while back, and this is a fairly simple pattern. So you can see this is where I simply stacked the steel and then folded it to increase the number of layers. And the only thing I did to make this not a standard straight laminate pattern is at the very last part, I stuck a wide stripe of 15N20, one of those things you just saw, in the middle of the last 3 stacks, and I'll explain what that means in a second, and fused it together. So when I ground it to bring out the pattern, you get this sort of interesting stripe that comes out. And it's like what Owen was talking about. You want to play with textures in your Damascus. You want something that is interesting from afar and interesting when you're up close like this. So that's an example of fairly straightforward pattern welding. You can get relatively tricky on this. Van, you want to pull up that one JPEG that I was talking about? This is an example of the sword that I'm making with Petter. And you can see on that sword, we've got some very dense, that's 1,200 layer plus on the edge. Then above that, you've got, I think about 600 layers. And you got some really broad stripes. Those look like this, basically. So this is 16 layers of just straight laminate that if you did it this way, it would just be very big would be like, you know, that sort of density of lines. But then you turn it sideways like this, squish it down. It almost makes it like, if you're familiar with the term stroke in graphic design, where you want to highlight something, these parallel lines can highlight things. And then you've got the twisted bars at the top that are opposite to each other and ground in. So, okay, take that off the screen now. Here's an example of a sax that we welded up. This is Van's sax at Arctic Fire 2012. This is kind of a collaboration between all the guys. See this edge material here? That edge material has been rotated 90 degrees so that you see the edges. Think of it like the pages of a book. So if I had a book and I were to rotate it up so you saw the edges of those pages and then did that, then you would get these edges here. You got some twist bars up here with these little spirals. But notice how in this, wrong example. Okay, this is an example of more of a complex twist. I don't know if you can get in there, but take a look real close in the middle. You've got twists that are, they have like almost an explosion pattern to them. And that's called crushed W's. And I'm going to be talking about that in a second too. So I just want to show how versatile, hold on one second, I'm going to get something to, okay. Look also that you can use pattern weld for non-blades. See, this throat of this scabbard is pattern weld, as is the chape. But you notice that I did very low layer on this because I wanted there to be a pattern, a textural difference between this and the very tight pattern on the blade. Also, the fittings of this blade are pattern weld. So take a look at how we've got a high layer count here, very complex twists in the middle, and then out here, slightly lower layer count on this to bring out those stars. And then you've got low layer for the pommel and extremely low layer for the scabbard. So you've got, like Owen was saying, texture out here at the macro and at the micro level. So it's a very versatile, and this sword has pattern weld for the hardware. So this, if you look on the edge here, you're going to see some stripes, but take a look what's happening underneath. I don't know if you can see that. See those wavy lines? Those are those crushed W's I was talking about. Same thing on this pommel. Look how you've got straight lines here, but when I ground into it, you get this crazy sort of sundial effect. So I just love pattern weld because there's so many variations. You just can't come up with enough variations on it. So how do we do this? Moving along. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you how to do a basic forge weld. So what you're going to need is a forge. Propane forges are what I use. People have used obviously coal forges and charcoal forges forever. But propane forges are easy to come by. Propane's cheap. If you get online and just type in a bladesmith's forge, smithing forge, you'll find them. You can pick one up for a couple $100. Also, if you go to bladesmithsforum.com, there's tons of threads on there on how to build your own. You know, keep in mind, standard disclaimer, bladesmithing's dangerous. You can kill yourself a lot doing this. So be careful. But the main thing you're going to want for forge welding is you're going to want a forge that you can restrict airflow to. You don't want just a simple farrier's forge where you're dumping propane into a box of fire brick. You want a forge that can actually crank down the air, and I'll show you exactly what I mean on my forge, so you can create a reducing environment. The reducing environment means that there is no oxygen in the forge. There's a reason for that. So let me actually go out and put this in the forge and start heating this up, and I'll tell you a little bit more about the theory. Now, the last time I did one of these demos, I shouted at the camera because the forge is a little bit loud, and I forgot I had a microphone on. So if I start shouting, I'm sorry, I will remember eventually, and I will stop shouting. Okay, so I got to get my torch here to light the forge. There's my dad. Hi, Dad. We're live. Say hi to the folks. Hi, folks. And so that's my forge. And this is a fairly large forge because I do swords, but you don't need a forge this big. They have very, very small forges. Also, there's a great book called The $50 Knife Shop by Wayne Goddard that'll teach you how to make a forge that you couldn't do Damascus in, but you can do it just out of one of these propane torches and a fire brick. So it's on Amazon. You can pick it up. So talking a little bit more about the theory of pattern welding, this is obviously a very small billet. I should define the term billet. Billet is the stack of steel you start out with to fuse together. And is my sound level right? Yeah, okay, we're good. So I'm going to be setting this weld using a hydraulic press, but I want to talk to you about how you would set this weld if you don't have a hydraulic press. So imagine the face of my anvil here was this. If you're using flux, and I should tell you what flux is first. Flux is something like 20 muletine borax. Why am I even talking about this? When I put this in the forge, it's going to start reacting with oxygen molecules, and it's going to form something called scale. If you were to take a look at this stuff right here, see that stuff? That's scale. That forms when it's the chemical equivalent of rust. So that forms when steel interacts with oxygen in the forge. This will inhibit your weld. It'll keep these things from sticking together. So what we want to do is keep that scale from forming and inhibiting the welds. We want it to stick together. So one of the things, just plain old 20 muletine borax, I don't work for the company, is a perfect flux. It's all I've ever used. It melts over the steel and it forms a barrier, and it's also a bit corrosive. It'll clean the steel and it makes welding much easier. However, there is a way that you can weld without flux, and that's what I'm going to demonstrate now. A fluxless weld requires you know how to use your forge pretty well. That is, you need to be able to crank down the oxygen in your forge to make a reducing environment. Let me tell you what I mean by that. So let me put my gloves on so I don't burn myself. Oh yeah, I used it to wipe my brow. Here we go. You guys probably can't hear a word I'm saying, can you? Yeah, well, but you know how to do this stuff anyway. So check out this. I've got a reducing environment going on here because you see these flames coming out, these kind of wispy, feathery flames? That means I'm dumping more fuel into the forge than can be combusted within the body of the forge. And that's a good thing. That's what we want. Right? So these valves right here allow me to adjust the oxygen that is being dumped into the forge. Watch what happens if I open this up. See how the feather gets much smaller and the roaring of the fire gets much louder. And watch what happens. This flame kind of is going to come out a little bit. Don't want to burn the camera up. But if I do like this, I clip it off quite a lot. Look at all that flame coming out there, right? That's because that fuel has to find the outside to get air to combust. So what I'm looking for in this sort of environment is a reducing environment that's still hot enough to get to 2300 degrees. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick this billet, where did I put my billet? I put my billet over here. I'm going to stick this billet in the forge. Now you might be asking, what if I don't have a welder to weld a piece of rebar onto the handle, or as a piece of, I used to be able to use words. What if I don't have a welder so I can tack weld a piece of rebar onto use as a handle? You don't need one, and you don't need to be able to tack together the stack with, you can do it with wire. So just take your stack, and I used to use, before I had a welder, heavy coat hangers. So you just cut coat hangers, wrap around and twist the wire together. Also, you don't need a hydraulic press. That's something I'll explain in a second. Makes it much nicer, but you can do everything I'm about to show you with a hand hammer too. It just takes longer. So I'm going to wait until this billet gets fairly hot, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to let it soak for a little bit, but by reducing the oxygen. That's going to make this flame come out quite a bit, and what that should do is it should actually, any scale that's formed, I don't understand the chemical processes very well. I'm not a metallurgist, but people like Kevin Cashin and Rick Furr and so on, they understand, and there's lots of threads on our forum talking about what's actually going on here, but it's going to convert that scale back into weldable material. So I'm going to let that heat up for a little bit. Let me tell you about some of the other stuff I'm going to be demonstrating. So when you saw Owen doing the plasticine demo, he was talking about how multi-bar welding is challenging, especially if you go with a tall stack this wide. So I've got here a fairly, you can see I've got a fairly narrow and tall stack of multi-bar, and here I've got a sort of a straight laminate that's on its edge, 16 layers. I've got 200 layers of crushed W's, which I'll explain what that is if I have time. Another straight laminate, and then 2 high density, about 600 layer bars right here. This is going to form a kind of a modern looking sacks. Won't be traditional. So the trick with these and with any multi-bar, let me go check this on my billet real quick. That's fine. Is parallel surfaces. Owen touched on this in his demonstration. If you've got a stack of different bars, looking at the end here, you're never going to weld up if you've got this stuff going on, right? Because as you compress down, not up, down, as you compress down, what's going to happen to that? Well, that's going to go like this, and the whole thing's going to like this, and then you're screwed. There's almost nothing you can do at that point because you're also deforming the steel. So what you want is you want very parallel cold fit. So when I put these things together, where did I set it? Where I set it? I set it down here. I take my grinder and I make these bars very, very parallel to one another. So you can see I've got a nice tight parallel fit there. And the other thing is I tack it on the ends. Now I'm going to cut this bit off. You don't want to, if you've got a welder, you don't want to tack on the side normally because you'll get strange gray blotches in your steel. But if you know you're going to cut the end off anyway, you can do that. And I wanted just a little bit more pressure to help put that together. Let me flip my steel over. Now, if you're going to use flux, which if you're just starting out, I recommend you use flux. You wait until this thing barely starts to get red, and then you pull it out and you sprinkle it with this stuff. I'm going to be using flux on the other welding operations that I'm doing later, and so you'll see how to work that. But one of the reasons that I say you ought to use flux is that it gives you a better clue on when you've reached welding temperature. So they've got wind going on. If the canopy flies away, we'll keep rolling. It's no big deal. Look into this forge here now. You can see the temperature is getting up to close to welding. You see those feathery flames coming off the edge? That's a good sign that we're approaching welding, at least on the edge of dollars. But see how it's dark in the middle? It hasn't soaked all the way through. My fire is just a little too hot here. I'm going to turn down both the temperature and increase the reducing environment. Just 1 second, and that's going to start to soak this piece and reduce that scale like I talked about. Sorry, man, got you following me around here. And where did I put the... It's going to be a great demonstration, me wandering around looking for my tools. Ah, there it is. So, like I said, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to reduce this down a little bit more. Okay, so now I've got a really heavily reducing environment in there, and the steel is getting more uniform temperatures because it's got a uniform color that's showing up in there. I'm going to let this soak just a little bit, and then I'm going to take it over to the hydraulic press, and we're hopefully going to set the weld. Now, if this was a piece of steel, a billet that you had coated with flux, there's very specific hammer blows you want to use to set your weld. And again, I started to do this earlier, but I realized it was too early in the demonstration. To set a weld with flux on it, you do not imagine this, the face of my anvil was the billet. You don't want to strike in a pattern like this. Why? Because the edges have now sealed and you've trapped a pocket of flux in the middle, and that you can't compress that down and it will keep the weld from happening. So you want to start your blows in the center and work in a circle, driving the flux out. Another thing that you may have noticed, but I didn't say, I weld only one end of the initial stack, leaving the other end open. So when you work the flux, that way you can work the flux out, not only the sides, but towards the end. So you would start in a pattern like this. So you're driving the flux out this way and towards the end. Flux is good while the piece is heating up. It's not good in the steel between the layers. Okay. And I would say we've got that thing pretty well soaked. So now I'm going to go over here, and I need to get to right there. Let me turn on the hydraulic press. So this is a 50-ton hydraulic press, very nice thing to have. They come in various shapes and sizes. This one is way overkill for the job we're doing now. So come over here, and I'm just gonna, look at that. Whee! So, one of the things you do between welds, dip your wire brush in some water and scrape off the scale that's formed. Now, if this was a fluxed weld, there'd be a lot more stuff to clean off. Now, I can tell, just because I have experience doing this, that weld set pretty well. Again, we didn't use any flux on this, but out of an abundance of caution with these, I usually set my welds 3 times. Like Owen was saying, there's sort of, it's not, pressure has some effect in the strength of your joints, but you want to do it multiple times to really get your joints strong. So I'm going to do this, get this up to temperature one more time, and set it, and then I'm going to rotate it on its edge and give it some taps, and that's how you can tell if your welds have taken. Because if your welds have taken, if you rotate it on the edge to draw it out, I'll tell you what that is in a second, the whole thing will move as one solid piece. If, however, you've got a bad weld in there, a black line will suddenly go boop, and at that point, even if you're trying to flux this weld, throw some flux in there, heat it back up, and close it back down. So, what else do I need to tell you? Oh, drawing. Yes, that's a good thing to tell you. While this is soaking, let's go to the whiteboard and I'll tell you about drawing, because obviously that has 12 layers, right? So how am I getting it to 1,000 plus layers? Well, through either folding or cutting and stacking. So I'm going to have this big square, right, with a handle on the end. And it's like this, right? What I want is I want to turn this into this. So I can then either cut it 3/4 of the way through and then weld it back on itself, and this will double the layers. We now have 24 layers. Or what I more often do, and is the worst part of pattern welding, it sucks because you have this way, and that is draw it out very long and cut it into as many pieces as you want and stack it on top of itself. So if I started out with 12 layers and I draw it out and I cut into 3 pieces and I stack it, then I'll have 36 layers. Just do the math from there. So you can go up to as high as you want. Let me rotate this, I'll be right back. Okay. And the other thing I said I'd tell you about is crushed W's. So if you got the end of a bar and you've got just the straight laminates, as you saw in Owen's presentation, when you grind into it, let's say this is, I'm not the illustrator here, Peter is, but I'm doing my best. So let's imagine this is a grind on there. You get these lines that would come out like this because you'd be cutting into the bars as they go down like that, right? Well, straight lines are interesting, but squiggly lines are more interesting. How do we get squiggly lines? We take our billet, that's like this, and we rotate it up 90 degrees to where it looks like this, and then we squish it, that is the technical term, squish it like this. And now I've got a bar with this on it. Cut and stack that, and these lines will not line up perfectly. Then when you smush that further, you end up getting these really cool squiggly lines. And you use those instead of the straight lines to either twist or do any of the cool stuff that we're going to do in the other patterns. If there's any questions coming in online, I can take them while I do this. All right, we're back up to welding. I'm going to go back to the press. Be careful, this is hot. Do not put this on your tongue. And give this a good solid squeeze. Looks like it's working well. And give it a little tap on the edge. So, you see what I'm doing now? I'm drawing it out. I'm making this longer and narrower. And you can do exactly what I'm doing right now to make this longer and narrower. Just continue rotating it 90 degrees and it will go out. And that's, if you want nice straight layers, that's a good way to do it. But you see these other bits on the press here? Those are drawing dies. And notice how if I pinch it with these drawing dies, which I'll do on the next round of heating, it moves the steel only this way. It doesn't spread it that way. This spreads it unidirectionally. So if I want to make things longer so I can then take and fold it back on itself or cut it up and stack it, these are very good. And while that's heating up, I'm going to tell you about the next thing I'm going to do. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put this in the forge, and I'm using flux on this one because this is that multi-bar. And I'm going to wait until this gets just very dull red, and I'm going to coat it with that flux. And it's going to basically coat it with molten glass, which is going to protect it, and it's going to clean it a little bit, and then we're going to squish it together. But we're going to do it with a hammer, not with a hydraulic press. And the reason we're going to do it with a hammer and not with a hydraulic press is because we don't want too much force on a multi-bar. I'm going to give this a little more oxygen now. See if I can find where I put that down. There it is. Yay. If you guys watching online have any questions, please let me know. I'm just going to give this just a little more oxygen. My forge that I have in my other shop has a much easier way of increasing the oxygen, but this is a bit of a pain, but deal with it. If I ask you later, I set those there. And remember to not work your steel too cold. Like what I'm going to do right now is on the drawing die, I'm going to start drawing this out. And I don't have to worry about heat too much when I do this because on the drawing die, I'm reinforcing the weld, right? And I'm flattening out those ridges. See how much longer this piece has become? But the thing you want to be careful of is when you're drawing, if you're on the edge like this, you don't want to work this too cold because now you're working against the welds that you've set. And so you want to work this where it's relatively hot on the edge. So you might be tempted, oh, it's still a little red, I can squish this. Don't do it, especially if you're using a press. You could come up with a shear here. Put it back in the fire. So that's the basic pattern welding sequence. I would continue to draw this out, fold it back on itself. Oh, if there's something important I forgot to tell you, you grind it shiny with like an angle grinder if you let it go cold. If you keep it hot, you can flux it, wire brush it, and fold it back over. Again, I can go over more of this later in detail if you want. I'm going to stick this on the welding table. And now, I just got that too hot. Look at that. So I am of the flux early, often, and repeat school. Lots of people aren't of that school. Your mileage may vary. But when I do multi-bars, I just coat the crap out of it with flux. You see how that bit on the end got a little too hot and it started to flex over? So that's a gap and I don't like that. So I'm probably going to pinch that just a little while it's dull red to get it back into close proximity. And we're going to get this thing up to welding. So talk a little bit about the theory of doing this multi-bar. Gentle, gentle taps is what we want to do to set these multi-bars. So use the biggest hammer you have, but you're going to want to tap it very gently. You want the force to make the bars stick together, but don't like that, because what you're going to do is you're going to make the steel bend like this, right? And that will cause gaps and bad things to happen. So this one has already been welded together, but if this was that one, what I would do is you move the billet, you don't move the hammer, and I would just start back here and then, and I almost would not apply any more, I mean just slightly more pressure than that, but you just are almost pushing it in there. You just want to get those layers to stick, and we're going to do that multiple times. We do not want to wail on this thing, otherwise you're going to get it to warp, right? This is what it looks like after things have been welded together. So you can see we've got gaps, what it looks like on the surface, but look at the end here. See how it's solid in the middle? So that's actually fused all solid throughout the billet. And so this is an alternative to the tip technique that Owen used in his clay demonstration, and I'll tell you about that next. I may have decided to do too many things in my presentation. What do you guys think? Am I all over the place? Give me feedback. Turning that over. Okay, look in the, I'll get out of your way here. So, look in the forge. You see those little bubbles in the forge? That's the flux. And they say when the flux is dancing, you're at welding. So I don't want to see if the whole thing is universally at this bubbling consistency. It is, right? It's not a blown forge, it's a Venturi forge. Yeah. So there are other types of forges that have blowers on them where it's actually forcing air in. I've never used one of those forges. They say that they use less propane, and a lot of people really like them. Owen, do you use a Venturi or a blown forge?
I use both. I use a Venturi now.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Owen has a good point. When I'm doing hand hammering like this, you can get sparky bits up in your eyes. Again, those are the technical terms. Also, what I really should have here, and I just don't have my pair here, is a pair of IR sunglasses. There is infrared and so on that comes off of this forge, and you stare into it a lot, it can hurt your eyes. So, okay, I'm up to welding temperature. See all the forge? If you get close in there, look at all the bubbles on there. See how it's dancing? So that's how we, and the feathery flames coming off the edges. This thing's at a nice hot welding temperature. I'm going right there at the anvil. I'm going to set this weld, I hope. I hope. So, like this, might get a little bit of splattering here. As I said, this might, I'm just going to set this thing ever so gently. A little bit more pressure now, a little bit more pressure now. And stop. Don't go farther than that. See how the anvil pulled heat out of the bottom one? I'm going to turn it over to do the other side. And now I'm going to wire brush. That water helps to pop this stuff off. Clean out the edges. Hey, my bucket's on fire. My bucket's on fire. Whew, my bucket's really on fire. It's kind of a rubber coating on that thing. I didn't know it. Flux on here. Now, I'm going to do that at least one more time. This time I'm going to give it more force on the hand hammer. And then I'm going to show you a set of dies that I made for my hydraulic press, which I find are extremely handy when you're doing multi-bars. The problem with this is there's too little surface area, so you get a pinch point, right? And I want nice universal pressure on this bar. So I have these much longer dies that I made up for my press. And you can see, they're going to distribute that pressure evenly in a parallel way along this billet. I'm not going to do that this time, but I'll do it next time. And, boy, this is like a cooking show. The other thing I want to demonstrate to you is twisting technique, right? So a lot of the more interesting patterns you get comes from twisting. So this right here, told you I'd be all over the place, Dan, is one of these. So I've got straight lines running down, very low layer, about 16 layers. I've rounded off the edges a little bit. You need to round the edges a little bit. If I really am working a piece into a very tight twist, I'll round the whole thing, but you definitely want to round over the edges at least when you're doing a twist. And there's an interesting little jig that you can make. That I have over here. See, if you have a welded, this is very easy to make up. Cut the end off a wrench, weld it here. Cut the end off 2 crescent wrenches, and then you can, that way you have an adjustable thing. And you can, I've already got this set up, like this. And then you use a twist wrench. Many people use monkey wrenches. I got a crescent wrench here, a piece of rebar welded on the end. Grab this, and that's how we're going to twist this. You have 2 of these because you can actually interrupt the twist, meaning you can have it grab right here and then twist in the middle. But more on this after we heat it up, and I have to grab a pair of tongs. Tongs. So let's stick the thing we're going to twist in here. 2 irons in the fire, and go back to the anvil and reinforce this weld. Okay. The old saying goes, you want to reinforce these welds really slowly. I say slowly, slowly, catchy monkey. So we want to go put that in there, and the next round we'll go to the press and we'll see if we can't compress that down just a little bit more to get the weld completely set. Don't need a press. I can just continue doing hammers. But if I went to the anvil next, instead of going to the press, what I'd start doing is I'd start increasing the strength of my blows to reinforce those welds even more and begin to draw it out. Do we have any questions from online? I'm such a good... Ah, yes. It is, yeah. This is a Sammy hammer right here, Sam Salvetti. Made it for me in 14. It's great. This is an Eastern style forging hammer. You can see it puts it makes the blow very cool. So very easy to use. Highly recommended. He doesn't make them very often, but when he does, they sell out really quickly. If you're listening, Sam, hi. Okay, now we're going to go show you how to twist stuff. I put this in the forge wrong. It's all right. I'm going to set it here. Keep trying to get you to trip, Dan, but you're too good. Okay, I'm going to set this in here like this. Grab on like this and check this out. 1. And what Owen was saying is absolutely correct. When you twist, you want to keep track of how many turns you make. Get some of the scale off of there. And see how it's starting to twist there? It's pretty cool. But if you want those stars to come out like you saw in the pattern, we're going to have to twist it a lot tighter than that. So let's put it back in the forge. I'm going to straighten this up just a little bit though. Yep, looks good. And this time I'm going to put it in the forge the right way. Okay. Now going back to the hydraulic press. The thing about this set of dies, like I said, is that, see, I can put the whole thing on there, and now I'm going to go real slow here. See how that compressed there? That's a good weld. And where'd my wire brush go? There it is. You can tell we've got a good weld because we have all one color in the steel. There's not any black bars there. I'm going to reinforce this weld when I pick this up again several more times before I begin putting any shear pressure on it. But that's the basic way in which you do a multi-bar. Remember, it's all about the cold fit, making parallel and not applying too much pressure. This was a very tall, really. This was a very tall, skinny one, so this was a little bit tricky. Start out slowly, and the wider the bar, the easier it is to weld together.
Hey Dave, there was a question about why is there a right way to put the twisted bar in the forge?
Oh, because it's just because of that particular bar has a skinny end on it, and I want to put it in the vise. If this was not thin on that end, there wouldn't be a right way. But the most important thing is to remember which direction you were twisting in, and not screw that up. So now, evenness of heat is important in twisting. And watch look at how I'm not twisting enough towards the back side there. So one way you can fix that is I could throw a little water on this to slow down the twist here. I could put my rosebud torch, which is not working right now, on here to heat that up. Or you can grab onto it with a pipe wrench at that section and start just working that. I'm working this too cold, I could get a shear. But you can see I can just grab it here and start just increasing the number of twists I get on that one section right there to increase the twist. So when I make a twisted pattern, I twist it until these twists, you see how the twists they were like this, and now they're coming up like this? Twist until they're almost vertical. And that's how you're gonna get a nice tight pattern. But you know, whatever you wanna do. Now, how much time do we have left? 15 minutes, all right, we're going well. Final thing, fish mouth. So I'm gonna put this in the forge real quick while it starts to heat up while I explain a couple things. On a Viking sword, or lots of different types of swords, they are multiple bar, as you've seen many times now. So you've got the sword. Well, it's a great sword. You can tell I'm a swordsmith, right? Like a designer. Okay, you've got the sword, and you've got these bars that run along the edges, and let's say in the middle I've got some stripes, so like a herringbone, right? And then we got pattern on the edge. Well, what happens at the end of these bars? Well, we can do what Owen did, and that is form a core, and then wrap the bar all the way around. Or, if we have bars like this, I need to make this a little more parallel. There we go. What I can do is we can cut a triangular shape out, like this, and if we close it up by smushing it this way and this way, what that will do is these bars will come and meet in the middle, getting the same effect, fusing that together. That's called a fish mouth. And I'm going to put a little flux on the fish mouth. I say I just barely getting that barely getting red there, so just enough to melt the flux. Probably, like I said, I'm probably a overly cautious fluxer, but it seems to work. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm not going to get that piece of steel too hot. I'm just going to get it to forging temp, to where I can move it, and I'm going to move the mouth together so I can then get it up to welding temperature. Oh, one of the things I should tell you is, you notice I didn't just cut a triangle out of it. I actually, so again, you can do that, and I've done that and it works just fine, but it actually works better if it's more of an arc, like this. If you think about closing this up, it's easier to close up like this if it's got a more of a shape like this rather than just a straight angle.
Hey Dave, we have a question about color and welding temperatures. It says, am I seeing the weld temp color of the billet correctly via the camera? A hot yellow.
Hot yellow, yes, that's right. And you don't want to see sparks. Sparks are bad. Sparks mean you're burning off carbon, and that's not good. Okay, so see, this is not welding temperature. This is lower than welding temperature. Bigger hammer. You see? Okay, getting closer. You see how it's starting to close up? The fishy mouth, a little fishy fish. And I'm going to wire brush this. Give it a quick dip in the flux. Put it back in. Now, one of the tricks that I see when you're doing a fish mouth, the trickiest part is getting this part right here to weld. It's relatively easy to get here and here to weld, but lots of people end up with a gap right there. So one of the things that I do is I make my bar a little bit wider than I know the overall blade shape's going to be, and I do a pinch right here on the outside with the drawing die on the hydraulic press. That puts pressure directly right there, and then I form the rest out. Again, you want to work from here out. You don't want to weld this first because you want the whole thing to smush together like that. I use the word smush a lot. I think I need to come up with a better term. Okay. And that's awesome. And now we're gonna do the initial set, and then we'll do that pinch thing I talked about. Yeah.
Josh says, well, what about those of us without a press? How should we avoid the cold shot?
Just start from the back, and you can actually use the this part of your hammer to apply a little indentation there on the horn, I would think. What do you think, Owen? For if you want to apply a pinch right there?
I do it by hand.
You do the whole thing by hand.
I do it by hand.
Yeah, so you don't use the press at all. Yeah, I'm doing it out of an abundance of caution just because I've had a weld failure there before. But yeah, in fact, you know, screw it. I'm not going to use the press. Do it by hand. Oh, and you see that goopy stuff in the bottom of the forge? That's flux. It's this, and I just got a big old chunk of it on the side of the blade. I'm going to clean that off just because it's going to make it very sloppy. So there. Yeah, see how it coats the bristles. Trick for cleaning your wire brush off is actually like that. That's shattered. Yeah.
Do you use a sacrificial plate in the furnace to prevent damage from the flux to the isolation?
Yeah. There's actually two ceramic shelves in there, and occasionally you throw away the top ceramic shelf when it gets all gooey and gross like mine's getting. Okay, look at the sparklies. Here we got flux dancing. That's a good thing. Very close, very close. Make sure that I've got the right hammer here. Almost done. You can see things are very close to being done here. Probably don't need to flux, but we'll do it one more time. And unfortunately, we're not going to have I thought maybe I'd have enough time to give this a rough grind and dip it in the ferric chloride so you can see them come together. But we won't, so maybe I'll post that later as like a JPEG on the Facebook thread. So
One other question. What do you line the forge with?
the forge itself is lined with a refractory wool called Kea wool, and then that's coated with a something called ITC 100, which is an infrared reflector, which increases. And also, you want to coat your wool with something because, like Satanite, because otherwise you get little bristles that come out of it and get in your lungs. And then it's got a ceramic kiln shelf on the floor. And turn off the forge and do here. There we have it. So I'll probably reinforce that a little bit more with a few more. Actually, if you look real close here, you can see my gloves free. You see the lines coming together? That's how that works. So I hope you've enjoyed this rather rambling demonstration of various pattern welding techniques. I wanted you to see some hot work done during this year's presentation. I know for a lot of you that was a yawn because you've done this stuff before, but for those of you that hadn't actually seen pattern welding done, now you've seen a few different techniques, and appreciate you tuning in. Any further questions?
There is one, two questions. Would you mind touching up on decarburization? How much abuse is required, how to work around it, etc.? And what would be some reason for the individual bars not to fuse together?
A reason for the bars not to fuse together would be if it wasn't clean enough, not hot enough, or the pressure that you apply is uneven. So one of the things you can do, for example, is really whale on one part of it, and it causes the upper bits to open up. And then when they open up like this, you get oxygen in there, and they don't like that. And then you try to put them back down together, and they say, "Nope, I'm not sticking together." So light blows it first, and so on. And then decarb, I'm not an expert on that stuff. Don't let your steel soak too long. Put it in the fire as long as you need to. Take it out when it's ready to heat.
Someone says, I
Hit.
think I've wasted my life. That was beautiful.